She winks at me sometimes. There was always an excuse for forgetting my birthday. He's either at work or something unexpected came up. But can you blame him? A single father working multiple shifts to put food on our table. Nothing would ever make his baby girl cry. He would do whatever it took to make sure she would grow up like all the other normal kids. He'd go out of his way to earn enough, but only if he realized that his baby girl didn't need all the money to stack up before she was happy. The new dress, the flashy things that attracted the other kids, didn't attract her as much. If only he knew I just wanted his presence. He was doing so much that it felt like he wasn't even there at all. But I couldn't complain. Mother, before she passed, had told me to be there for him even though he was all over the place. But every day while he was out, shifting and shuffling jobs, I missed him dearly. I was aware as a kid, 6 years old, and I was really conscious about the environment I grew in, staying alone or sitting on the front steps for long hours waiting for my father to show up. I observed the faintest things. I could perceive the faintest flutter of the wings of a butterfly, the silent whisper of the wind, and how it sounded like it was always calling my name, or the little flickering of lights in the still darkness when I looked up into the starless skies. I was aware of the mindlessness of other children my age, the way they didn't matter if anything happened around them, the way they played in the sand, chased themselves across the streets, and when they didn't get what they wanted, they'd throw their head backwards and wail in grief for something they've lost. I could cry, but I wasn't allowed. The moment I think about it, my mother's voice was in my head, telling me how I needed to be brave for my father. Then slowly, I sucked in the sobs, swallowed them like pills to my loneliness, and made them my armor. But part of me was aware of how lonely I was, how I needed my father to be around, read me a story and cuddle me to sleep. I knew I didn't want to wallow in idiocy like the other kids, but I wanted to wallow in love. Everyone deserved that. I soon became used to the environment. I'd listen, I'd smell, and I'd see what many didn't because they were too busy. People passing by on the street would turn and see a weak and pale kid left alone sitting on the stairs. But within me, I was getting drawn to the force of the nature that surrounded me, like gravity. I was falling deep into a realm that made me understand the situation around me even more. On the 1st of April was my birthday, a day for fools to be fooled. A day people acted all crazy and rude under the pretext of the celebration of my birth. A day one would lie blatantly and get credits for how good and how dexterous the lie was. A day my father would show up at the doorstep, completely dumbfounded that he forgot my birthday. He'd make up a story, rush to the kitchen to make a horrendous cake, and would fall asleep at the dinner table due to exhaustion. My father wasn't really a bright man, but he was good at heart, and for that I was grateful enough. Today was the same. He was home by 10 at night, smelling of sweat. His scent was so concentrated I was used to it. The smell would waft up my nose from wherever I was, and I'd come running into his arms. On the 1st of April, 1992, the day I would never forget, my father had come prepared this time, and although he looked a wreck, he still had that smile on his face. The smile that would always lift your spirits and remind you that even when the walls were caving in, it was okay to smile.
"Baby girl, I got you a present."
He whispered a kiss into my cheek, and from behind his back, he introduced Joe. To be honest, I didn't care about Joe at first. I was more concerned about whatever food he was bringing. Since I have zeroed my mind that birthdays weren't made for a child like me, a child who assumed responsibilities at such a young age, I was more about the food. Hunger was a thing my father tried to fight against, but like many other things, he didn't do so well. Even though I knew it would be the usual bread and akara, or moi moi, if the cellar hadn't closed before Dad had finished his numerous shifts, Whatever it was, I'd take it over a million Joes.
Do you like it?
He asked. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't, but Mother's voice came reminding me of being grateful.
Of course,
I replied, hoping we'd move to the part where we celebrated my birthday with food. I wouldn't want to make him feel unappreciated, so I collected Joe and caressed it like I'd just given birth to it. I noticed the wide smile on his face, and that brought me joy too. Joe the doll. I noticed the blue, beautiful eyes of Joe, and it reminded me of the eyes of some foreigners I'd see on the TV while it was still working. Dad was a very busy man, so he had no time to take it to a repairman, and slowly it deteriorated into scrap worthy of nothing less than a few kobo. Joe's dress is a silky blue gown with some stones on it, the type you can wear to a dinner if you could. I also noticed her long, dark, curly hair, one that any girl would die to have. Nothing similar to the spongy afro sitting atop my head. Although rare, there it was on the head of Joe, my new partner. It was a beautiful little doll, but I thought less of it at the moment and more of what to fill my belly with. Dad brought out a plate of food from the nylon he was carrying, and to my surprise, it was fried jollof rice, a dish considered high class and touché where I came from. The aroma filled the room, and he handed it over to me.
Here, I brought this for you to eat,
he said very calmly, or probably very weakly, like he would fall asleep the very minute I turned my back. I gave him Joe because I was more interested in the food, and maybe the residue of the child in me just knew Joe would be safe in his arms, at least while I chowed away.
Where are your manners?
Mother's voice occurred in my head.
thank you very much.
I said to him and gave him a tight hug. Dad had slept when I finished the food. Joe was still in his arms, cradled like a child found in the solace of her beloved father. I didn't bother to wake him up, since I knew he would be on a sailboat riding in the waves far into dreamland. This was the only chance he got to rest himself, and I wasn't going to take even a second of that away from him. And since I was about to sleep too, it was no bother at all. Children my age were probably with him on the same sailboat far down the sea of dreamland. I kissed his forehead, raised a blanket to his chin like he would do to me sometimes, tucking him safely like a lifeguard, just in case the boat capsizes. There was a crease etched between his brows, so subtle, but it was there, and perhaps Joe would keep him company through the night. As I turned to return to my bed, a whiff of air blew through the window, smacking me hard in the face, and raising Joe's hair in its perfect curls. She was indeed beautiful. I stared keenly at the doll, wondering what pushed my father to purchase it, and before I could figure that out on my own, I noticed a wink in Joe's left eye. I paused in puzzlement for about a second, and I got the wink the second time. I smiled a bit. Maybe that was the reason. It was 7:49 a.m. the following day, and my dad was still at home. I met him sitting on the green sofa chair in the parlor. The chair was the only comfy one in the house. His head was resting on the cushion at the back, and Joe was safely tucked in his arms.
Dad,
I called him, scrubbing my eyes with my little fists.
aren't you going to work?
I asked.
I'm a bit weak, but I'll be going very soon,
He replied, but with a weak voice. He got up from the chair, and before he could take the next step, he fell. As a child my age, maybe I knew a little too much, but I wasn't prepared for it all. Nobody told me what to do when one's father falls face flat on the cold concrete of the living room. My mother died in a bed. Perhaps I would have been aware of such situations before. All I knew was that he was too frail, and he was hurting, taking steady steps at first, but then I sprinted across the room to where he lay, and I crashed by his side. It was a horrific moment for me. I didn't know what to do. I called out his name, and he didn't respond to any of my calls.
Help! Help!
I shouted, thinking someone would hear me. I ran out to call our nearest neighbors. Fortunately, I met two of them outside, and they helped me take him to the nearest hospital in a car. I didn't know much of what was going on. All I wanted was for my dad to wake up and talk to me again. I sat on the cold waiting bench as I watched doctors, my neighbors, pass me by. They saw me and looked away, thinking I was too little to understand anything they tell me. They needed an adult to speak to, someone in the family who wasn't a pale and scrawny-looking child. Many hours after he was rushed to the hospital, some of our family members came. They were his brother and cousin, who were closer with him than other members of the family. They both gave me that look too, the look that suggested something really bad had happened. The doctor who had taken my father had called them secretly to a distant corner where I couldn't reach them to talk. All the while, they glanced back at me with sorrowful eyes, like I was a stray puppy drenched in the rain and needed all the love in the world to be whole again. No. I just needed one love, and that was from my father. When they were done, my uncle told his cousin, "Take me home." But I wasn't going to leave, not until I spoke with my father.
What did the doctor say?
I quizzed. They both looked at each other as if they were waiting for a mana from above to intercede on their behalf. It was then I affirmed that nothing was okay. Where I came from, one was raised to keep quiet, so, in silence, I followed them. On our way home, I asked my father's cousin, Uncle Sagan, what happened to my dad.
You'll stay with us now because you can't stay alone,
He said politely, so coolly that I might have imagined it. My curiosity grew because I didn't know why I couldn't stay in the hospital with my dad, although I had ideas. Ideas a 6-year-old shouldn't have. When we got home, I met a lot of our extended family members waiting for us. Family that I never knew I had. My parents had taken me far away from the craze, as they called it. It was like a family waiting for one of their own coming from a foreign country, except this time it was something bad. Everyone looked sad. Some of them were crying, while some who weren't were consoling the crying ones. We walked up to them and I saw my grandmother crying bitterly too. She had her face buried in her palms and her shoulders shook, bitterly. She hugged me tightly and said she would try to do everything my father couldn't do. That was the moment I realized my life was bound to change forever. Two decades went by in a jiffy. The memories were still fresh, just like they happened yesterday. But I'm glad I'm doing well by myself now. Joe was the only memorable thing I took from our old apartment. My grandmother didn't let me pack much. Every single day that went by, Joe didn't stop winking at me. She grew on me with time, and we were almost inseparable because every time I looked at her, she reminded me of the man who died while he struggled to keep me alive. My father was my hero, and Joe reminded me of his existence. They say as time goes by, you tend to develop new traits or harness the old ones, and forget some things. As for me, I chose the latter. As time went by, I began to forget how lonely I used to be. There was always a voice in my head. There was always a voice calling out my name from the shadows of the room. There was also something I forget, and that was where I placed things. One minute, I placed Joe on the shelf, but when I looked around, she was gone. I thought I was going crazy because I kept querying myself. I kept checking and rechecking my other stuffs. If I had remembering issues, I shouldn't just be forgetting where I placed Joe. It wasn't a problem until I started taking serious cognizance of where I placed her. I'd mark spots just to remember, and then I realized it was more than that. My uncles thought I was going out of my mind, so they tried to make me socialize. They thought that if I made new friends, I might be able to understand how women my age reacted to life. They were worried that my father's death about 20 years ago had traumatized me to the extent that I wouldn't let go of the doll. They made me open social media accounts, which, in all honesty, was a bit distracting, but somewhere within me, I wasn't alright. Something was wrong with me, or maybe it was the doll. One could make friends easily on Facebook. All you had to do was upload a profile picture and your interests, and people would like to be your friend. I love reading books, and I think that was very attracting to many people. One could upload their thoughts, and people would comment. sometimes nicely, and sometimes harshly. But I always had people who took my side online. Uncle Sagan was the leader of the team. I decided to put up my plight with a picture of Joe on my Facebook and told my friends about the winking and the mysterious change of positions that I'm not always sure of. A lot of them liked the story because it sounded fictitious, while some commented and shared the story because they wanted other people to witness the mystery. However, it was my plight. Some mocked me for still owning a doll at my age, and some told me to throw it away. But Joe meant a lot to me. Some months after the post, I got a message from a strange user who saw the story on her timeline from one of her friends who shared it. I opened the messages, and in it read,
"Please throw the doll away. I had a doll many years back too, and it's like the one you uploaded. My dad bought it, and all you said in your post was the same thing happening to it. My dad and mom died the next day, and after prayers and some kind of research by family members, they told us the doll was possessed. Whenever we talked or looked at it, it winks. For your own sake, please throw it away."
She sent me a picture she took with the doll, and it was exactly the same as Joe. There was no difference. My heart skipped a beat. Okay, maybe more than one, but I couldn't believe what I had just read. Was it true? Did my dad take it from a bin or a dump? I don't think my father would do that. But all she said was the same thing Joe was doing. I looked for Joe, where I put it in my drawer, but she wasn't there. I checked the sitting room, and I saw it there, winking at me. I was terrified, especially after I read that message. I put Joe in the drawer, and I didn't know how it got away from there. Suddenly, all the affection I had for her melted away. I didn't want the wink anymore. My father's death popped into my head again, and I wished he was the one sitting on the chair, and not Joe. Even though I'm still curious how the doll ended up with Dad, maybe the person whom he bought it from picked it up from the bin, I wondered. As for Joe, I was done with her. I decided to burn the doll and not throw it away. It was a bit hard when the fire started because Joe had been with me for a long time, but the thought of my father soon filled my head as I watched it burn.